manhunt for a killer in a possible terror attack. Dutch police now searching for a 37-year-old Turkish-born man in a deadly tram shooting this morning. Welcome back to America's Newsroom Monday morning. I'm Sandra Smith.
And I'm John Scott, in for Bill Hemmer. The terror threat level in the Dutch town of Utrecht now at its highest after a gunman opened fire in and around a tram at a busy intersection, killing at least 3 people and wounding several others.
Garrett Tenney's live at the State Department with an update from there. Garrett, good morning.
Sandra, good morning to you. There is a massive manhunt now underway for the man police believe carried out this attack. Their main suspect, as you mentioned, a 37-year-old man originally born in Turkey, and they've identified him as Gökmen Tanis. Police released this image of him, and they're warning folks not to approach him and to call it in immediately if they see him. Dutch officials are still trying to figure out the details of what happened. What we know at this point, though, from witness accounts, is that about 4 hours ago, a gunman opened fire on a streetcar at a busy intersection in the country's 4th largest city. At least 9 people were wounded in the attack, and so far 3 have died. Utrecht's mayor said that terrorism is currently the most likely motive, and officials have raised the terror alert for the area to the maximum level. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte said the situation was very worrying, but added, if it is terror attack, then we have only one answer. Our nation, democracy, must be stronger than fanaticism and violence. Now, the State Department has issued a security alert for Americans there in the city, urging them to avoid the area where the attack took place. We've also reached out to the State Department, and at this point, it does not appear that any Americans are among those who were injured in this attack. Sandra.
All right, Garrett Tenney with a live update from the State Department on that this morning. We'll continue to follow it. Garrett, thank you.
New Zealand appears set to enact new gun laws in the coming days as police say a gunman who killed 50 people at 2 mosques there acted alone, but might have had support. Now the White House is dismissing attempts to link President Trump's political rhetoric to the terror attack.
I don't think it's fair to cast this person as a supporter of Donald Trump any more than it is to look at his his eco-terrorist passages in that manifesto and align him with Nancy Pelosi or Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. This was a disturbed individual, an evil person.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us live from the North Lawn with more. John.
John, good morning to you. The president's critics in politics and the media drawing connections between the New Zealand killer's ideology and President Trump. The president lashing out at those critics on Twitter in just the last 90 minutes, saying, quote, "The fake news media is working overtime to blame me for the horrible attack in New Zealand. They will have to work very hard to prove that one. So ridiculous." The killer did mention President Trump in a hate-filled screed that he posted online, hailing the president as, quote, "a symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose." Kellyanne Conway had this to say about that this morning.
He put out a 70-page manifesto, and I guess everybody scoured it, searched for Donald Trump's name, and there it is one time. But he also said he aligns closely with the ideology of China. He said he's not a conservative, he's not a Nazi. Also, this president condemns hate and evil and bigotry, and we will continue to do so. People should feel safe, but they should especially feel safe in their places of worship. And we've seen far too often where that is not the case.
The White House also reminding this morning that the president has repeatedly said that he is not anti-immigrant, he is anti-illegal immigration, and that those are 2 very different things. Here's Mick Mulvaney from yesterday morning.
That's just absurd to say that there's some type of connection between being against illegal immigration, which is what the veto was about, for legal immigration, and the ruthless live streaming of murder of 15 people. The 2 things have nothing to do with each other. The president is not a white supremacist. I'm not sure how many times we have to say that.
In an interview yesterday morning, the U.S. ambassador to New Zealand, Scott Brown, Fox News contributor, echoed those same sentiments and as well tweeted out over the weekend that we stand with our Muslim brothers and sisters. He and his wife also brought 49 lilies from their own garden down to a memorial near the mosque, John, to pay their respects to the victims of that horrific shooting last week. John?
John Roberts, our Chief White House correspondent there. Thank you.
Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke walking back some comments after they drew some criticism over the weekend. But O'Rourke is building a big war chest, raising $6.1 million in the first 24 hours of his campaign. Bill McKern is Main Street columnist for the Wall Street Journal, a former chief speechwriter for President George W. Bush, and a Fox News contributor. He says, quote, Beto, he's going to run the largest grassroots campaign this country has ever seen. Brought in some big numbers in the first 24 hours, over $6 million poured in.
Yeah, it's interesting. Clearly, there's a lot of enthusiasm for him, right? The money shows that. There are a lot of people that see him as a Bobby Kennedy kind of figure, charismatic and so forth, was competitive in a red state like Texas. But the problem is he may be eaten by his own. Right? The Democratic Party.
Well, it is interesting because he was forced to respond to a lot of comments and a lot of things from his past. I know you suggested he came in with some...
Yeah, someone accused him of stolen valor for using the word Beto and sort of implying he's Latino. I think he made some comment about not sharing the responsibilities with his wife. Look, the point is he's going to be attacked for anything. And I think this is one of the problems that the modern Democratic Party has, is that these candidates have to run the gauntlet of this identity politics. And almost anything he said would run afoul in some way or the other.
It's interesting about eating their own or supporting them. It's still
the guy on the top is an old white male, Joe Biden, who's going to have some of these same problems.
Fair enough.
Clearly, a young white male isn't going to be an improvement in that sense.
Well, he was asked about that, whether or not it put him at a disadvantage to be a white male running for the Democratic ticket. And he said, no, it doesn't, acknowledging that, knowing that he grew up with privileges, is the way he put it, and knowing that and learning from that is what he said. Senator Amy Klobuchar was on Meet the Press over the weekend, and she was asked about whether or not her party should nominate a white male candidate, and she responded with this.
How important do you think it is for the Democratic Party to make sure they nominate somebody that isn't a white male?
I don't think there should be one litmus test, but I do think that our ticket should reflect the country. And I always like to say, may the best woman win.
So you took away from that what?
What? A no answer. This is the problem. We talk about the Democrats. Can they moderate to the point of attracting the rest of America? And if they're going to be obsessed with these questions during the primary, that's not a good... I don't think that's a good path to go. The senator could have said, I think we should nominate the best person in the party, the person who can beat Donald Trump, and I think I'm that person. But she didn't say that because that's not where the Democratic Party is today.
Let me just read a portion of this. This is the Wall Street Journal. It's an op-ed by Ted Van Dyke. Democrats may blow it in 2020. In that piece, he writes, and again, I'll just read the first half of it. When voters consider changing presidents, they usually focus on the weaknesses of the incumbent and vote for a replacement they perceive as his opposite. Voters thus will be looking for a 2020 Democratic presidential candidate who is reflective, experienced, a unifier rather than divider, and demonstrably capable of serious governance. That tells you what?
I'm not so sure. He's saying that people want something on substance. You know, they think Donald Trump is unpresident. Democrats think Donald Trump is unpresidential, unreflective, and they want someone serious. But again, I go back to the actual questions and the answers and the tests that are being held out for Democratic candidates. And I don't think they're gearing up to put the best candidate that they have against Donald Trump.
Interesting. Well, as far as the fundraising is concerned, Beto and that $6.1 million in the first 24 hours of announcing his run, but he quickly had to respond to some things in his past. I know you referenced that as some of the baggage that quickly emerged. He had to apologize for what he called really hateful writings from his youth. After a fictional post he wrote as a teenager about murdering children surfaced. He also apologized, as you mentioned earlier, about joking about his wife Amy raising their children, sometimes with my help. They pounced on him for that.
Clearly, no Democratic candidate who's a white male could be on a sitcom, because the kind of stuff he's apologizing for in that sense is a staple of every night in every sitcom about the absent dad or the dad not pulling his share. I mean, I just think this is lunacy.
So how do you think this is shaping up? Because we've seen the polling when it comes to Joe Biden, not yet in the race, although I don't know, over the weekend he sort of slipped and seemed to insinuate that he's in the race.
Once you're in the race, also it gets a lot tougher. You know, people are a lot more attractive when they're outside the race. People saying, come on in, Joe, you know, come on in, Beto. Then they have to actually fight it out with other candidates. The debates are going to be very illuminating. Someone's going to dominate and someone's going to trip, and we'll see a lot.
It'll be really something. We know what the president has said about this. He's like, whoever it is, I will take them on.
He doesn't have a choice.
Yeah, exactly. Bill McKern, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, John?
Fox News alert now on a nuclear standoff with talks between the U.S. and North Korea in limbo amid reports Kim Jong-un might restart missile testing. So where do we go from here? General Jack Keane joins us just a bit later in the hour.
Plus, tensions in the Democratic Party as moderates try to govern around the party's progressive left wing. Are Democrats facing their own Tea Party-style rebellion? Karl Rove is here to discuss that next.
Where we are is not a good thing. And this idea of like 10% better from garbage shouldn't be what we settle for.
The out-of-the-ordinary deaths of 6 Ferguson activists are raising some concerns in Missouri. Ferguson, you might know, erupted in protests in 2014 after an officer fatally shot 18-year-old Michael Brown during a confrontation. Well, since then, the Associated Press reports 2 young men linked to those protests were found dead inside torched cars. 3 others died in apparent suicides, and 1 other collapsed on a bus in an apparent overdose. Other activists reportedly say they have been targeted in dangerous ways. Ferguson police say the deaths have nothing to do with those protests.
The rise of the progressive left reminding some Republicans of what happened in their party about 10 years ago, with outspoken first-term Democrats creating tension with the leadership by pushing their own agenda in the House. In a Politico magazine article titled, quote, "Are Democrats facing their own Tea Party-style reckoning?" The author writes, quote, "A few freshman members in some of the safest seats in the country pursuing an ideologically pure agenda that riles up the party's base but could endanger the moderates who were essential to winning the majority." Let's bring in Karl Rove, former White House Deputy Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor. Karl, good morning to you. So is this happening?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The piece by former Congressman Tom Davis of Northern Virginia, I think, is right on target. He suggests that the Democrats are facing the same phenomenon the Republicans faced after 2010, when the sort of Tea Party came in and said, you have to be very conservative, even if you're from a moderate part of the country. And we saw this tension played out on the floor of the House. We saw it played out in primaries. And I think we're likely to see it play out inside the Democratic Party with one very big difference. And that is that in 2010, when the Tea Party Republicans came in, they had some allies who'd been there before, but when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Representatives Omar and Tlaib came in, they already found a large number of so-called progressives already there, already demanding things like Medicare for all and impeachment of President Trump and so forth. So there's a bigger problem for the Democrats, I think, they face today than the Republicans faced in 2011 when they took control of the House again.
Interesting, Karl. And in that piece, Tom Davis writes, "I witnessed the transformation of my party into one increasingly challenging for centrists, and now I'm seeing the same thing happen to Democrats." Can Nancy Pelosi turn things around?
Well, she's got a delicate balancing act, because she has a significant number of people inside of her caucus who are already out there on the extreme: Medicare for all, guaranteed federal job, universal basic wage, impeachment of the president. But she recognizes this fundamental fact. Look, there are 235 Democrats today in the House of Representatives. 32 of them are freshmen who hold a seat that was occupied by a Republican member of Congress and carried by Donald Trump. So if they lose 18 of those people in the next election, they're now 217 and in the minority again in the House of Representatives. So for all that we pay attention to people like AOC and Congresswoman Omar and Congresswoman Tlaib and Maxine Waters and Al Green and Elijah Cummings and Jerry Nadler and a lot of the people who are pressing for more extreme views, the people who put the Democrats back in power are basically people who are from centrist districts that were occupied by a Republican member in the suburbs of places like Chicago and Philadelphia and New York and Atlanta and Dallas and Houston.
Harley Ruda, a Democrat from California, moderate freshman Democrat from California, was on this program last week. He was also on Sunday Morning Futures over the weekend, talking about whether or not there is pressure coming from the left wing. Listen.
How much pressure are you feeling to go along with some of your freshman colleagues like AOC?
I don't feel any pressure at all, and I'll tell you why. The citizens of Orange County who elected me here recognize that I have moderate views. Whether the outlandish ideas on the left or right, I'm not going to support it. I'm going to work with my Republicans and Democrats who believe that most Americans are between the 20-yard lines and get good legislation accomplished.
Want to get your thoughts on that response, Carl?
Well, he said the right things, but whether or not he's going to be able to achieve them is something else. I mean, are the dominant strain inside the Democratic Party in the House being willing to vote for legislation that is a compromise between Republicans and Democrats? We've seen no evidence of that thus far. And one of the bad things for people who are moderates in both parties is that even if they deviate to some degree from the orthodoxy of their party with their votes on the floor of the House, they still get caught up. We lost a lot of members last time around who Republicans who represented their districts well, but were being held to account for the dominant strain within the Republican Party. My sense is it's going to be hard for a lot of Democrats to be able to say, well, I'm not AOC, I'm not Omar, I'm not Tlaib, I'm not Jerry Nadler, I'm not Elijah Cummings, I'm not all of these left-wing ideas, Medicare for all, guaranteed job, guaranteed wage, blah, 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 blah. It's going to be hard for them to take that balancing.
Very interesting. And lastly, the number one lesson that Tom Davis wrote about here was don't mistake your party's opposition to the president for unity. But he points out one very important detail to that. Pelosi has room to maneuver that her Republican predecessor didn't have. It's a really interesting piece, Political Mag, kind of lengthy, but are Democrats facing their own Tea Party style reckoning? Carl, final thoughts before I let you go.
Well, I think Politico has got a good piece in it, and people ought to go read it. But I do think that point is an important one. Simply being in blind opposition to the president is not what the people in those districts, those 32 districts, right, that elected the majority for the Democrats want. They want people who will go there and work with the Republicans and Democrats, president of whatever party it is, to get things done for the country. But that is not the dominant theme inside the Democratic Party. Think about how many Democratic presidential candidates have said, I'll work with Republicans and work across aisles. Two, think about how many Democrats have thus far in leadership in the House stepped forward and said, I want to work with the president and find common ground. Not a whole lot of them.
Karl Rove, interesting stuff. Thank you, sir. Good to see you this morning.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
A deadly fire burning for more than 20 hours now. What Texas authorities are saying is the cause. A live report on that ahead.
Plus, the Midwest bracing for more deadly flooding with millions in the path of rising rivers and floodwaters that forced thousands of evacuations.
You're stuck. I mean, you don't dare get in it. You could tell. I mean, it sounded like just a rushing. I mean, even inside my apartment here, I could just hear the water rushing.
In the middle of a deadly opioid crisis, authorities say another drug is on the rise. Methamphetamine use is on the upswing again in the U.S. The DEA says it's seen a more than 100% increase in seizures of meth in recent years. Meth is now the main drug of concern in almost all Southeast Asian countries. And U.S. officials say the meth sold today is cheaper and as deadly as the opioid fentanyl.
A Fox News alert on historic flooding in the nation's heartland. At least 3 people have died and thousands more are forced out of their homes as overflowing rivers turn towns into islands and highways into rivers. And the worst might not be over. Alicia Acuna has more. Alicia.
Hi, John. Yeah, governors in Iowa, Nebraska, and Wisconsin have all declared states of emergency. You have dams and levees that have been breached and also bridges that are being washed away by what the National Weather Service is calling historic river flooding. And you talk about the people who have died. Just one example, one man was under a bridge that collapsed as he was trying to help stranded drivers. Take a look at some of these images. There's something to see. This is out of Nebraska, where evacuations continue as hundreds of homes and businesses are being inundated by this rush of water from the Missouri River that broke its banks after heavy snowfall and rain. Folks are being rescued off rooftops and the top floors of their homes, as are animals. This video was posted by a Bellevue, Nebraska police officer who also said that the department would not be able to carry out any more animal rescues due to rising water and dangerous conditions. In Fremont, Nebraska, residents are pulling together as the flood water turns their community into an island.
As devastating as it is, and as heartbreaking when a family comes in tears, there's always 3 or 4 more people that come right alongside them and show them what they need and how they can help.
In Iowa, where more than 2,000 people have been evacuated out of their homes, the governor of that state saying that they are seeing significant damage with so many levees that have been overtopped. In Dodge, Wisconsin, a farmer there says this is the worst his family has ever seen.
All the water melting and from all that rain we had, it's just more than it can handle.
The situation is far from over. John, with the National Weather Service saying that these conditions will continue into midweek. John.
All right, Alicia Cunha from Denver. Alicia, thank you.
Fox News alert as federal prosecutors look into Boeing's development process after 2 deadly plane crashes in just 5 months.
Plus, a new report that special counsel Robert Mueller is following new leads related to possible Russian collusion as the president ramps up his criticism of the investigation. What it means for the timing of the Mueller report.
The first thing we need to do is to make sure that the Mueller report is protected and that it is promptly shared in full. There may, of course, be some work product in that report that should be protected because it's either classified, this is, after all, a national security investigation, or because it might interfere with other ongoing investigations.
The Wall Street Journal reporting federal prosecutors and the Department of Transportation are taking a closer look at the making of the Boeing MAX jets. The news following 2 deadly crashes involving the same MAX 8 model in a matter of months. Aviation analyst Mike Boyd joined us last hour on America's Newsroom.
I think we have an issue also with the operators not understanding the airplane, and I think that should be the path we go down from this point on.
Doug McElway's live in Washington. Doug?
Hi, Sandra. Focus on the Ethiopian Airlines crash has now turned to Washington. The Wall Street Journal reporting this morning that federal prosecutors and the Department of Transportation's Inspector General are both probing the development of the 737 MAX 8 and whether there were improprieties with the certification of the plane at the FAA. The Journal reports that on March 11th, the day after the crash, a grand jury issued a wide-ranging subpoena for documentation and email correspondence. It is highly unusual, the Journal says, for prosecutors to delve into a regulatory approval of a commercial airliner. Separately, the black boxes are revealing some initial findings that point to real close similarities between the Ethiopian crash and the Lion Air crash 5 months before. The data shows the MCAS automated system, designed to lower the plane's pitch in the event of a stall, was turned on. The tail flaps trimmed to force the nose down, just as in the Lion Air crash. That's in line with debris found at the crash site. But in the Lion Air crash in October, we also know that the MCAS was acting on bad data from a malfunctioning sensor that indicates the plane's pitch and angle of attack. In a statement yesterday, Boeing CEO said, quote, Boeing is finalizing its development of a previously announced software update and pilot training revision that will address the MCAS flight control law's behavior in response to erroneous sensor inputs. Fox News is also told by a former NTSB investigator that pilot training may also prove to be a contributory cause, that the MCAS system is easily turned off with 2 simple switches on the center console by the pilot's thigh. Turning it off would have set the flaps to a normal position. The first officer in the Ethiopian Airlines flight had only 200 hours in the MAX 8 cockpit.
That is outrageous. Right. In our country, airlines that are out there, all the airlines, have high-time pilots in the left seat and a minimum, there's an FAA-mandated minimum, whether one wants to believe it's too high or not, of 1,500 hours for the right seat.
A source tells Fox News the cockpit voice recorder is now downloaded. It's been taken back to Ethiopia for translation purposes. Sandra,
Looking
back to you.
learn a whole lot more there. Doug McKelway, thank you.
Look at what's going on the Mueller investigation. We almost have 40 convictions and indictments already, and the report hasn't even been released. So,
but just
it's
to be
good that
clear,
we're having appropriate due
those
diligence.
convictions have nothing to do with collusion or Donald Trump.
That's correct. That's exactly correct. So that's why we need to get through the report. And by the way, you also need to remember, too, that the Mueller report is only one of 3 investigations going on right now. You also have what's going on in the Southern District of New York and the Eastern District of Virginia. So we tend to focus on the Mueller report being released and that's going to answer all questions. It's not. It's one of 3 major investigations going on.
A new report on the Mueller probe says the special counsel is pursuing new leads on Russian collusion, even as we continue to hear that this investigation is winding down. Joining us now, Judge Andrew Napolitano, our Fox News senior judicial analyst. Everybody in the world seems to think that this investigation is in its final stages. Everybody maybe except Preet Bharara. He's the former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. Listen to what he says.
I think people should view with some skepticism the notion that gets breathlessly reported every week that the Mueller investigation is coming to an end. It may be because Andrew Weissmann, who's one of the top deputies, in fact, the top deputy with Robert Mueller, announced that he was stepping down, which indicates maybe it's wrapping up.
So what do you think, Judge?
I am not happy with trying to read the tea leaves about when the report is going to come out. First, I don't think there's going to be one report. I think there's going to be several in various different areas of his exploration. Secondly, it appears as though he is still investigating the nature of communications between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence. That is the area where Paul Manafort, when he pleaded guilty before Judge Amy Berman Jackson, agreed to cooperate with the FBI. That's the area where the FBI accused him of lying and where, in a secret hearing, proved that he lied. So we know that that is a focus still of Bob Mueller. It's almost inconceivable to me that he would close up shop if that is his focus.
But that was supposed to be the thrust of his investigation, wasn't it?
Yes. You know, I can't explain why it's taking so long except to give you a big picture. A big picture is a 10,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. Some areas are complete and some areas are blank and some areas there are gaping holes. And evidence doesn't always come to prosecutors in a rational or orderly fashion. But Rick Gates, who was Paul Manafort's chief deputy throughout the entire campaign, is apparently still cooperating with Mueller, and Mueller is still trying to find out the nature of the communications because he can't get the 2 people who communicated. Manafort stopped talking to him, and Klemenchik, the Russian intelligence guy, is not within Mueller's jurisdiction. He can't put him before a grand jury and ask him questions.
Yeah,
so where they're going to go, I don't know, but I don't think it's coming to a conclusion soon.
A lot of those indictments that Harley Ruda was talking about to Maria Bartiromo, those are of Russian intelligence agents that they will never see the inside of a U.S. courtroom.
Correct. They're not going to come here voluntarily in order to go to jail.
Related to this, we're going to see apparently tomorrow the redacted search warrant that led to that FBI raid of Michael Cohen's apartment and his hotel room and his office and everything else.
Okay, so
that's going to be pretty interesting.
Yes, it is. Here's what we'll see. The redactions, as I understand it from reading what the Judge Pauly wrote this morning, will black out things like email addresses and telephone numbers and an apartment number, but everything else is going to be there. You'll see the affidavits that were signed by FBI agents and DOJ officials that persuaded a federal judge to authorize a pre-dawn break-down-the-door style raid on 4 venues simultaneously, each of which had been under Michael Cohen's control. You'll also see what's called a return on the search warrant. The items that were seized, many of which we don't know about, many of which have never been revealed yet. So it'll be very, very illuminating that this is coming out now. Why is it coming out now? Because Michael Cohen is apparently completed with whatever he's been giving the government. He's getting ready to go to jail. There's no reason to keep this secret any longer. Is there information in there about communications between Michael Cohen and his then exclusive client, Donald Trump? That's what everybody wants to see.
Be fascinating to see what happens tomorrow. Also, a big ruling from the Supreme Court today. They're ruling in the Beltway sniper case, that case that terrorized the Washington, D.C. area for so many months. The young man convicted in connection with that case, Lee Boyd Malvo, is apparently going to get resentenced, or at least the Supreme Court is going to hear whether he should be?
Right. The Supreme Court's going to hear whether he should be. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole for a crime or series of crimes committed at age 17. On its face, that's an unlawful sentence because the Supreme Court says you cannot sentence a juvenile to life in prison without parole unless you make certain specific findings. A federal appellate court found that the state trial judge did not adequately make those findings. So if the federal appellate court decision is not interfered with by the Supreme Court, he'll get another sentencing. It doesn't mean that he won't get life in prison without parole. It just means that it will be a more thorough and exacting sentencing proceeding, or it could be that he'll get a finite term, which would allow him to be free at some point in his adulthood. He was 17 at the time. He's 34 already. Seems like yesterday.
It does.
Yeah.
John Allen Muhammad, whose picture we had up earlier, was the older of the two. He was executed as a result.
By the state of Virginia, yes. And that obviously was upheld on appeal prior to the execution.
Judge Andrew Napolitano.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure to work with you, Johnny.
Good to see you.
Likewise.
Sandra.
More than 13 years after she disappeared, the first trial starts in the murder of a former beauty queen. What led to a big break in this case?
Plus, tough talk from North Korea as accusations fly, along with threats to walk away from nuclear negotiations. General Jack Keane on what this could mean going forward. More than 13 years after a former beauty queen disappeared, the trial begins today for one man linked to her murder. Tara Grinstead, reported missing in October 2005. Investigators had few clues back then, and the case went cold until February 2017, when the Georgia Bureau of Investigation says a former student named Ryan Alexander Duke admitted killing her. A few days after he was arrested, a man with a similar last name, Bo Dukes, was arrested and accused of helping cover up the crime. Both are being tried separately. Bo Dukes' trial taking place first today. Ryan Duke's trial starts in 2 weeks. The two men are not related.
North Korea threatening to resume missile testing. A senior North Korean diplomat accusing U.S. officials of creating a hostile environment that led to the abrupt end of last month's summit. Here's acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney.
I think the resumption of the missile testing would be seen as a sort of a violation of some sort of breach of trust. I think there was a general understanding that there was no reason for that to continue as long as we were continuing to have conversations. The fact that we didn't get a deal in Vietnam doesn't mean that the relationship was in peril. It just means there was no deal to be had at that time. Doesn't mean there's not an agreement we can make in the future.
Let's bring in retired four-star General Jack Keane, Fox News senior strategic analyst. General Keane, always good to have you on the program, sir. Thank you for being here. So you look through this briefing. It was North Korea's vice foreign minister that conducted this briefing in Pyongyang on Friday. They were briefing foreign diplomats as well as journalists. In that meeting, that vice foreign minister went as far to say that Ambassador Bolton, John Bolton, national security advisor, poisoned the Vietnam summit with gangster-like demands for North Korea. What's going on here, General?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, clearly what's happened here, Kim Jong-un came home empty-handed. He truly expected to get some kind of sanction relief from President Trump because he essentially put on the table, Sandra, the same deal that the Kim dynasty has put on the table before. Give up a significant nuclear facility, but no weapons at all, and get some sanction relief. That did not work with this administration. So he is in a face-saving mode right now. And that's why they're attacking not the president, but they're attacking the team around him that sort of got these negotiations off track. The truth is, setback for North Korea here is what's happened. And he's trying to regain some leverage. Not so much with the attack on Bolton and Pompeo, but by saying this: I may not go back into negotiations. I may resume testing. That's the leverage he's now trying to apply after this setback.
Senator Ron Johnson was on Sunday Morning Features over the weekend, General Keane, and he made the case that Kim should take this big deal offered by the president. Listen.
The bottom line is President Trump continues to try and offer that deal, but it's got to be a big deal. Chairman Kim has to accept the fact that he's going to give up his nuclear capability, his missile capabilities, in exchange for what would really be good for North Korea and his people and his regime, integration with the modern economies of the world.
It's really interesting to hear what you said and tying this all together, General Keane. Were you surprised then that Kim didn't think he was dealing with a different administration this time around after he had already had relations and he had already had one summit with this president?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what happened to him, you know, he's written these very personal and warm letters to the president, actually with some degree of affection. I spoke to someone who had seen some of these letters and validated what I just said. And I think he misinterpreted the personal relationship to mean that he would be able to influence the president in terms of policy decisions. And that did not happen. And that's why I think he's so miscalculated. And in terms of what the senator is saying, I agree about the economic prosperity issue. I think that is an issue for North Korea, but it's not central. What really is central, the reason why they've got 40-plus nuclear weapons and a considerable amount of ballistic missiles is for one reason, and that's to preserve the regime. So if he's going to give up weapons, and we don't know that yet, if he's going to make the step to do that, we have got to give him, Sandra, some guarantees of security for that regime. And that is clearly the central steps that will have to be taken. What are some examples of that? Well, certainly ending the armistice, ending the war. Those are steps in the right direction. Getting the North Korean and South Korean armies to pull away from each other and the DMZ, all steps in that direction. We have a long way to go here, and I think we're still very much in the early stages of these negotiations.
As this threat continues in the wake of these new developments, General Keane, I'm sorry, I've only got a few seconds left. Do you see the United States, as Secretary Mike Pompeo has warned, escalating the sanctions or increasing the sanctions?
The sanctions should be increased because Russia and China are violating them anyway. We should call them out and get the UN to also identify that, given the fact they voted for the resolutions. I do believe, real quick, that the negotiations will continue. It's in North Korea's interest, and I doubt that they'll resume testing because that brings us right back into crisis and potential hostility.
Great to get your thoughts and perspective this morning. General Keane, thank you.
Good talking to you, Sandra.
Just a few minutes away from outnumbered at the top of the hour. Dagan and Harris, what do you have?
I love the way you say the title of our show. We got to get you on the couch. Hi, John. President Trump is taking issue with coverage of the New Zealand mosque shootings, as some journalists are questioning his handling of the attack. Meanwhile, activists confronted Chelsea Clinton when she attended a vigil for the victims, why they blamed her for the massacre, and why Donald Trump Jr. came to Chelsea Clinton's defense.
Plus, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke sucking up all the media oxygen as he campaigned over the weekend. But at times it appeared more like an apology tour than a rollout of a White House run. What are his chances in this 2020 contest?
You mean he's not born to run? That's why he apologized.
He's born to ride a motorized scooter, Harris.
We'll get into it. Wow, there's a preview. Outnumbered at top of the hour, John.
We'll be watching. Thank you. Meantime, plant fire burning out of control for hours, closing schools and forcing residents to stay indoors. What caused this raging Texas inferno? A raging fire at a chemical plant near Houston is still burning more than 20 hours after it began. The fire spreading to an 8th storage tank full of gasoline byproducts. Casey Stiegel is following that story for us. Casey.
Yeah, John, pretty incredible pictures, as you can see. This is happening in Deer Park, Texas. That is a suburb of Houston. For perspective, it's about 20 miles to the southeast or so of the city. A population of about 32,000 people, where the shelter-in-place order was lifted this morning for those residents after air quality samples did come back safe. However, some area schools still closed as a precaution. This after the fire spread 5 additional tanks in the overnight hours, bringing the total number now burning to 7, according to company officials. There was some reporting that it was 8. Now we're hearing 7 burning. This is at the Intercontinental Terminals Company. It stores petrochemical liquids and gases, and on its website, the Deer Park facility advertises a total storage capacity of about 13 million barrels. Fire crews are now using foam, trying to keep the flames from spreading any further, all while air quality continuously being monitored for toxic fumes given off by the burning tanks.
Normal gas type fire, so you're looking at carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, things like that.
So the TCEQ has been out here monitoring the air and have not found any elevated levels, and are now actually turning it over to a contractor.
Now, at this hour, officials do not know what caused the original fire, which started yesterday morning. About 30 employees were working at the facility at the time, but no injuries or reported explosions, thankfully. Once the flames are out, which we understand could take several days, a press conference just this morning, we're saying that the crews may have to just let it burn itself out, and that could take up to 2 days, John. Then the investigation into what exactly